After 3 years gone, his wife came back bringing lover and a child. Damon stood in his own doorway, watching Keisha walk in like she owned the place, her new man carrying luggage, a toddler clinging to her leg. 3 years of silence, 3 years of rebuilding, and she acted like she'd just returned from vacation. The audacity burned through him as she pointed to rooms, making demands about space, custody, what's fair. But Damon didn't explode. He didn't argue. He watched, cataloged every word, every gesture. Because during those 3 years, he'd learned something crucial. Silence is strategy. And when Keisha carelessly dropped her hospital bracelet near the front door, showing dates that didn't add up, he knew she'd just handed him the first piece of evidence that would unravel everything. Before we continue, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next part. Hit like if you're hooked, and comment below where you're tuning in from: Miami, Houston, or maybe Atlanta. Now, let's jump right back to see how Damon's about to turn the tables. The knock came at 7:30 on a Tuesday evening. Sharp and confident like someone who belonged, Damon set down his coffee and moved toward the front door, expecting a neighbor or delivery driver. He wasn't expecting to see Keisha standing on his doorstep after 3 years of absolute silence, flanked by a tall man with intense eyes and a toddler balanced on her hip. "Hey, baby." Keisha's voice carried that familiar mix of sweetness and steel. "We need to talk." She didn't wait for an invitation, stepping past him into the foyer like she'd never left. The man followed, carrying 2 large suitcases and a designer diaper bag, his gaze sweeping the interior with calculated assessment. The little girl, maybe 2 years old with Keisha's dark eyes and spiral curls, stared at Damon with curious silence. "This is Trevor," Keisha announced, setting the child down near the coffee table. "My daughter." She emphasized the possession with a slight edge, watching Damon's face for reaction. "We've been in California, getting our lives together, but it's time to come home now." Her tone suggested this was a foregone conclusion, not a request. Damon felt the familiar tightness in his chest, that old mixture of anger and hurt that had taken months of therapy to process. But something else kicked in now, a cooler instinct he developed during those 3 years of learning to survive alone. He didn't demand explanations. He didn't raise his voice. He watched Trevor scan the living room with proprietorial interest, noting how the man's fingers drummed against the suitcase handle like he was already planning furniture arrangements. "California," Damon repeated evenly, keeping his voice neutral. "That's where you've been." It wasn't a question. He'd stopped asking questions about Keisha's whereabouts after the first year of hiring investigators who found nothing but dead ends. "That's right." Trevor spoke for the first time, his voice carrying an authority that felt deliberately challenging. Keisha needed space to heal, to figure out what she really wanted. Now she knows. He set the suitcases down with finality, the sound echoing through the hardwood foyer. She wants to make this work, for everyone's sake. Keisha moved through the living room with unsettling familiarity, straightening picture frames and adjusting throw pillows like she was reclaiming territory. "Zara needs stability," she said, lifting the toddler onto the sofa. "She needs a real home, not some temporary apartment situation. This is her home too now." The implication hung heavy. Damon's house was no longer just his house. "The master bedroom should work for me and Zara," Keisha continued, her tone casual but firm. "Trevor can take the guest room for now, until we figure out a better arrangement. You've got that little office space upstairs, right? That might be more comfortable for you anyway." She was already redistributing his life, making decisions about his own space, without consultation. Damon felt Trevor's eyes on him, measuring his reaction, waiting for the explosion that any reasonable man might have. But Damon had learned patience in ways he'd never expected. 3 years of rebuilding from nothing had taught him that reactive emotions were luxuries he couldn't afford. Instead, he watched Keisha move through his carefully ordered life like a tornado with a smile, cataloging every assumption she made, every boundary she crossed. "Daddy's house is big," Zara announced suddenly, her small voice cutting through the tension. Trevor's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and Keisha shot him a quick glance that most people would miss. But Damon caught it, that flash of communication between them that spoke of planning, of conversations held in private about this exact moment. "That's right, baby," Keisha said smoothly, but her voice carried a slight strain. "This is a big house with room for everyone." She moved toward the kitchen, opening cabinets with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where everything was kept. "I see you still keep the coffee in the same place. And you got that espresso machine I always wanted." The casual observation made Damon's skin crawl. She'd been gone for 3 years. No calls, no texts, no forwarding address, yet she spoke like she'd been here yesterday. But what really caught his attention was the small plastic hospital bracelet that had fallen from her purse when she'd set it down near the front door. The white band with its printed information lay half hidden beneath the entry table, seemingly forgotten in her confident reclamation of his space. Trevor began moving the suitcases toward the stairs, his movements deliberate and practiced. "Where did you say the guest room was?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. Keisha pointed toward the hallway, her gesture automatic and certain, too certain for someone who'd supposedly been in California for 3 years. "We should probably talk logistics," Keisha said, settling onto the sofa with practiced ease. "Custody arrangements, financial responsibilities, how we're going to make this work for Zara's sake. She deserves a stable family environment." Her words carried the weight of moral authority, positioning herself as the reasonable parent thinking of the child's welfare. Damon nodded slowly, his mind processing everything he'd observed in the past 15 minutes. The easy familiarity with his house layout, Trevor's knowledge of room locations, Zara's casual reference to Daddy's house, the hospital bracelet, with dates that would tell a story, if he could read them clearly. "Of course," he said finally, his voice calm and measured. "We should definitely talk about what's best for Zara." But as Keisha smiled with satisfaction, believing she'd established control of the narrative, Damon was already calculating his next move. Because the hospital bracelet on his floor showed an admission date from 6 months ago, and Keisha had just claimed she'd been in California for 3 years, the hospital bracelet lay forgotten under the entry table like a breadcrumb in a fairy tale. Except this story had no happy ending in sight. Damon waited until Keisha and Trevor disappeared upstairs with their luggage before crouching down to examine it more closely. St. Mary's Medical Center, admission date 6 months ago. Patient name Keisha Williams, still using her maiden name, he noted. He pulled out his phone and photographed the bracelet from multiple angles, making sure the timestamp and GPS metadata would be embedded in the images. "What are you doing down there?" Keisha's voice drifted from the top of the stairs, casual, but alert. She appeared at the landing, having changed into comfortable clothes with the kind of speed that suggested she knew exactly where everything was in the master bedroom. "Just dropped an earring," Damon replied evenly, slipping the bracelet into his pocket before standing. "Found it." Trevor emerged from what was apparently now his room, carrying a different set of clothes. "Nice setup you've got here," he said, his tone friendly but possessive. "Keisha told me you'd done some renovations. The guest bathroom's real nice, that rainfall showerhead's a nice touch." The casual mention hit Damon like a cold slap. He'd installed that showerhead 18 months ago, long after Keisha had supposedly left for California. Yet Trevor spoke about it like reviewing a hotel he'd stayed in before. "Keisha's always had good taste," Damon said carefully, watching their faces. Neither showed any recognition that Trevor had just revealed more than intended. She must have described it well. "Oh, I'm very detailed when I talk about home improvements," Keisha laughed, but her eyes were sharp as she studied Damon's expression. "You know how I love talking about design." She moved into the kitchen with fluid efficiency, opening the refrigerator and scanning its contents like she was taking inventory. "You still keep the good cheese in the bottom drawer. And you finally got that Greek yogurt I kept asking you to try." The observation felt like fingernails on a chalkboard. Damon had started buying that specific brand 8 months ago on a whim, long after she'd vanished. But Keisha spoke about it with the confidence of someone who'd been shopping his refrigerator recently. He filed this detail away with the growing list of inconsistencies, maintaining his neutral expression, while his mind worked through the implications. "Zara, baby, don't touch that," Keisha called out as the toddler reached toward a decorative bowl on the coffee table. "Remember what Mama told you about being careful in Daddy's house?" The little girl immediately pulled her hand back, her reaction automatic and well-trained. But it was her phrasing that made Damon's blood pressure spike. She'd called it Daddy's house again, not this house or the house, like she'd been coached on the terminology. Trevor settled into the recliner, Damon's recliner with the kind of comfort that spoke of familiarity. Like Keisha said, this situation's going to require some adjustment from everyone, he began, his tone reasonable but firm. But we're all adults here. We can make this work if we focus on what's best for Zara. His words carried the subtle implication that disagreement would be selfish, that Damon's comfort was secondary to the child's welfare. You're probably wondering about our relationship, Trevor continued, gesturing between himself and Keisha. I want to be upfront. I'm not trying to replace anyone. I'm just here to support Keisha and be a positive male role model for Zara. She needs stability. And frankly, she needs to see healthy adult relationships. The backhanded criticism was delivered with practiced sincerity, painting Damon as the unstable element in the equation. Keisha picked up the narrative seamlessly. That's exactly right. Zara's been through enough confusion already. She needs to see adults who can communicate without drama, who can put her needs first. She moved to the Wi-Fi router on the side table, entering the password with quick, confident keystrokes. The password Damon had changed 14 months ago. The password she shouldn't have known if she'd really been in California. How did you? Damon started, then caught himself. But Keisha was already moving away from the router, pretending to organize Zara's toys while Trevor launched into another speech about co-parenting and mature communication. They worked together like a practiced team, each creating distractions, while the other crossed boundaries. The thing is, Trevor said, leaning forward with earnest concern, Keisha's told me about some of the challenges in your marriage. The anger issues, the control problems. But people can change, right? We're hoping you've done some work on yourself during this time apart. His voice carried false empathy, but his eyes held cold calculation. Damon felt the familiar surge of defensive anger, the urge to argue against accusations that had no basis in reality. But 3 years of enforced self-reliance had taught him something valuable. Sometimes the best response was no response at all. He simply nodded, watching Trevor's confidence falter slightly when the expected explosion didn't come. "Mama, I hungry," Zara announced, breaking the mounting tension. "Can we have the crackers from Grammy's house?" The innocent request hit the room like a small bomb. Keisha froze, and Trevor's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "What crackers, baby?" Keisha asked carefully, her voice artificially bright. "The good ones. From the kitchen, with the blue flowers." Zara's description was precise and confident, painting a picture of a specific place she knew well. But according to Keisha's story, they'd been in California for 3 years, and Zara had just described Grammy's kitchen in perfect detail, a kitchen that was 20 minutes away in the suburbs where Keisha's mother had lived her entire life. The day Keisha disappeared played in Damon's memory like a film reel he'd watched too many times. March 15th, 3 years ago, he'd come home from work to find a handwritten note on the kitchen counter. "I need time to figure things out. Don't try to find me." No forwarding address. No explanation. No timeline for return. Just 22 words that had dismantled his life overnight. The first month had been the hardest. He'd filed a missing person report, hired a private investigator, contacted every mutual friend and family member who might have information. Keisha's mother had sworn she didn't know where her daughter had gone, tears streaming down her face as she begged Damon to call if he heard anything. Her sister had been equally baffled, equally worried. The investigation had turned up nothing but dead ends and empty leads. By the 6th month, reality had set in with brutal clarity. The mortgage payments were his responsibility alone now. The 2-income budget they'd built their life around became a fantasy. Damon had sold his car, canceled subscriptions, eaten rice and beans for weeks at a time to keep the house. He'd taken on freelance work in the evenings, sacrificing sleep and social life to maintain the property payments that had once been manageable for 2 people. The emotional toll had been worse than the financial strain. Friends treated him with careful sympathy at first, then growing discomfort as months stretched into years with no resolution. Some suggested he move on, start dating, except that Keisha was gone for good. Others whispered theories about what might have really happened, their speculation ranging from affairs to breakdowns to elaborate escapes from debt or legal trouble. Damon had endured every theory, every piece of well-meaning advice, every pitying look that said he was the man whose wife had simply vanished. Now, watching Keisha move through his carefully rebuilt life with casual entitlement. Those memories felt like someone else's nightmare. She examined the mail on the side table with proprietary interest, sorting through bills and advertisements like she was resuming an interrupted routine. "You're still with the same electric company," she observed. "I always said we should switch to that green energy program. Things change when you're managing everything alone," Damon said quietly. The comment was meant to remind her of the 3 years of abandonment, but Keisha responded with a dismissive wave. "Well, that's over now. We're going to handle things as a family from here on out." She opened a credit card statement without asking permission, scanning the charges with the kind of familiarity that made Damon's skin crawl. "You've been eating out a lot. That's not healthy, especially with Zara in the house now. We'll need to establish better routines." Trevor emerged from the kitchen with a beer, Damon's beer, from Damon's refrigerator, and settled back into the recliner like he was claiming permanent residence. "Keisha's right about routines. Kids need structure, predictability. It's going to be an adjustment for everyone, but we'll figure it out." His tone carried the authority of someone making executive decisions about other people's lives. "Of course, there are legal things to consider," Keisha continued, producing a folder from her oversized purse. "Property arrangements, parental responsibilities, financial obligations. I've been doing research on spousal rights, custody guidelines, that kind of thing." She spread papers across the coffee table with practiced efficiency, each document bearing official letterheads and legal terminology. "I want everything to be fair and above board." Damon glanced at the papers without touching them, noting dates and signatures that would require closer examination later. But what caught his attention was a bank statement that had slipped from the folder, showing transactions from a local branch dated 18 months ago, the same time period when Keisha was supposedly 3,000 miles away in California. "These look comprehensive," Damon said carefully, not reaching for the documents. "You must have spent a lot of time preparing them." "I've always been thorough about important things," Keisha replied, gathering the papers with quick, nervous movements. "That's what responsible parents do. They plan ahead. They think about consequences." Her tone carried a subtle rebuke, as if Damon's surprise at their arrival proved his lack of foresight. Zara wandered over to the bookshelf, running her small fingers along the spines with obvious familiarity. "Where's the picture book with the puppies?" she asked, her voice carrying the expectation of someone who knew exactly where things should be. "The one from the bottom shelf? The one from the bottom shelf?" Keisha's face went carefully blank. "What picture book? Baby?" "The blue one, with the dogs playing in the park. It was right here." Zara pointed to a specific spot on the bottom shelf with startling precision, next to the grown-up books with the black covers. Trevor cleared his throat. "Kids remember funny things sometimes. Probably saw something similar at the library." Two, but Damon remembered that book. He'd donated it to charity 14 months ago, during one of his purging sessions, trying to eliminate reminders of the life he'd lost. Zara was describing its exact location in his bookshelf with the accuracy of someone who'd seen it there recently, someone who'd been in this house, in this room, long after Keisha had supposedly left for California. "Memory's a funny thing with little kids," Keisha said quickly, lifting Zara away from the bookshelf. "They mix up places they've been, stories they've heard. Right, baby?" But Zara's next words cut through the explanation like a blade. "Grammy showed me that book when we came to see the house with the yellow flowers." Her voice was matter-of-fact. Grammy, describing a memory that was clearly real to her. "She said we had to be very quiet, so no one would know we were here." The room went silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of evening traffic. Trevor's beer bottle paused halfway to his lips. Keisha's breathing became carefully controlled, and Damon realized that his wife had just been exposed by the innocent honesty of a 2-year-old who didn't understand the adult's game of deception. Living with Keisha and Trevor felt like hosting a hostile takeover disguised as a family reunion. By the second morning, they'd established routines that pushed Damon to the periphery of his own life. Keisha commandeered the master bathroom during peak hours, her toiletries spreading across the counter like territorial markers. Trevor claimed the kitchen table for his laptop setup, conducting phone calls with the casual authority of someone who'd been working from this space for months, not days. "Morning, babe," Keisha called from the kitchen as Damon came downstairs for coffee. She was already dressed in business attire, her hair styled with the kind of precision that required significant mirror time. "I made extra coffee, thought you might need it since you were up late last night." Her tone carried false concern, but her eyes held calculation. She'd been monitoring his sleep patterns, noting his movements through the house. Trevor sat at the table with financial documents spread before him, occasionally glancing at Damon with the measured assessment of someone cataloging weaknesses. "We should probably talk about household expenses," he said, not looking up from his papers. "Now that we're all here, it makes sense to split costs more fairly. Keisha's been carrying a lot of financial responsibility during your separation." The audacity was breathtaking. Damon had carried every expense alone for 3 years while Keisha vanished without explanation. Yet Trevor spoke as if the financial burden had somehow been reversed. "I've managed fine on my own," Damon replied evenly, pouring coffee from the pot Keisha had made with his beans, in his kitchen, using his utilities. "Of course you have," Keisha said quickly, her tone soothing but patronizing. "But that was survival mode, not really living. Now we can do better, create a real home environment for Zara." She moved around the kitchen with practiced efficiency, preparing breakfast with ingredients she'd somehow acquired without anyone seeing her shop. "I picked up some of that whole grain bread you used to like, and organic milk for Zara." Damon watched her work, noting how she knew exactly where he kept the cutting board, which drawer held the silverware, how to adjust the temperamental coffee maker that had quirks she couldn't have known without recent experience. Every movement revealed familiarity that contradicted her California story. "Mama, can I watch cartoons?" Zara appeared in the kitchen doorway, rubbing sleep from her eyes. She wore pajamas that looked expensive, well-fitted, recently purchased. The ones with the talking animals? "Of course, baby. You know where the remote is, right?" Keisha's response was automatic. Then she caught herself. "I mean, ask nicely, and maybe someone can show you how the television works." But Zara was already moving toward the living room with confident purpose, heading straight for the entertainment center where the remote rested in its charging dock. She picked it up and began navigating the streaming services with the muscle memory of someone who'd done this routine many times before. Trevor noticed Damon watching and offered a practiced explanation. "Kids are so good with technology these days. Show them something once and they remember forever." His tone was casual, but his eyes held warning, "Don't read too much into this." The morning continued with a series of small revelations that built like storm clouds. Keisha knew which neighbor played loud music on weekends. Trevor referenced the mail carrier's schedule with specific accuracy. Zara asked about the nice lady next door with the cat, using details that could only come from direct observation. "I should mention," Keisha said as she gathered her purse and keys, "I ran into Patricia Rodriguez at the grocery store yesterday. You remember Patricia? She lives 3 houses down. She was so excited to hear we were working things out. Said the whole neighborhood's been rooting for us." Her smile was bright, but her words carried implications. She was already managing the public narrative, painting their reunion as a heartwarming reconciliation story. "Patricia's always been supportive," Damon replied carefully. Patricia was also the neighborhood's most reliable source of gossip, which meant Keisha's version of events would spread quickly through their social circle. Anyone who questioned the arrangement would now seem like they were opposing a family's healing process. Trevor stood and stretched, his movements deliberate and possessive. "I'll be working from here today, so I'll keep an ear out for any delivery guys, utility readings, that kind of thing. Don't want anyone disturbing Zara's nap time." He spoke like he'd been managing household logistics for years, not days. "That's thoughtful," Keisha said, kissing Trevor's cheek with casual intimacy before turning to Damon. "We'll need to talk tonight about schedules, responsibilities, how to make this work long-term. I know it's an adjustment, but we're all committed to doing what's best for everyone." Her words sounded reasonable, even generous. But the subtext was clear. Resistance would be selfish and ultimately futile. After Keisha left for whatever job she'd apparently secured locally, Damon found himself alone with Trevor and Zara. Trevor settled back at the kitchen table, making calls that referenced local businesses, delivery schedules, and appointment times that suggested deep familiarity with the area. His voice carried the confidence of someone conducting business from his established home office, not someone who'd just arrived from California. Grammy's coming to visit today, Zara announced from the living room, where she was building elaborate structures with blocks that had appeared from nowhere. She said, "She has new stickers for my book." Trevor's phone call paused mid-sentence. "What did you say, sweetheart?" "Grammy's coming. With stickers. She always brings stickers when she visits." Zara's voice carried the certainty of established routine, of weekly visits and predictable treats. Damon moved to the window and waited. Sure enough, 20 minutes later, Keisha's mother pulled into the driveway with the practiced ease of someone making a regular stop. She had a key to the front door. She hugged Zara like they'd seen each other recently, and when she noticed Damon watching from the kitchen window, her expression shifted from warm familiarity to guilty surprise, the look of someone who'd been caught in a lie they'd been maintaining for months. The pieces were falling into place with devastating clarity. This wasn't a reunion. It was a takeover that had been planned, prepared, and partially executed long before yesterday's dramatic arrival. And now Damon understood why Trevor had seemed so comfortable, why Keisha knew his updated routines, and why Zara spoke about his house like a place she visited regularly. They'd been using his home as their part-time residence while he was at work, treating it like their private clubhouse while maintaining the fiction of California exile. The law office of Chen and Associates occupied the 15th floor of a downtown high-rise, its clean lines and wall-to-wall case files suggesting competence without ostentation. Lisa Chen met Damon in her conference room with the kind of direct handshake that immediately inspired confidence. She'd built her reputation on family law cases that others considered too complicated or too messy, which made her exactly what Damon needed. "Tell me everything," she said, opening a fresh legal pad as Damon settled into the leather chair across from her desk. "Start from the beginning. Don't leave out details that seem small. And don't worry about making her look bad. I need facts, not diplomacy." Damon spread his phone across the table, showing Lisa the photos of the hospital bracelet, the screenshots of Zara's innocent revelations, the timestamps that didn't align with Keisha's California story. "She's been gone for 3 years, he began, then corrected himself. "Or, she wants me to think she's been gone for 3 years. But the evidence suggests something else entirely." Lisa examined each photo with practiced focus, occasionally making notes or asking for clarification about dates and locations. When Damon described Keisha's familiarity with his updated Wi-Fi password and Trevor's knowledge of home improvements completed during the supposed absence, she leaned forward with the intensity of someone recognizing a pattern. "This sounds like a long-term fraud," she said bluntly. "The question is, what they're trying to accomplish. Property rights? Custody establishment? Something else?" She pulled out a yellow legal pad and began sketching a timeline. "We need to establish what's really been happening during those 3 years, and we need evidence that will hold up in court." "What kind of evidence?" Damon asked, though part of him already knew the answer would require more investigation than he could manage alone. "The kind that creates an undeniable paper trail," Lisa replied, already reaching for her phone. "Bank records, employment verification, housing arrangements, utility bills, medical records, anything with dates and locations that can prove where she's actually been living." She dialed a number from memory. "I'm calling Marcus Williams, best private investigator in the city for this kind of work." Marcus Williams arrived 90 minutes later, carrying a laptop bag and the kind of quiet confidence that suggested he'd seen every variation of human deception. He listened to Damon's story without interruption, occasionally taking notes in a shorthand system that looked more like code than writing. "Local residence is the most likely scenario," Marcus concluded, after reviewing the evidence. "Your wife and her boyfriend have been using your property part-time while maintaining a primary residence elsewhere, probably an apartment within 20 minutes of your house, close enough for regular access but far enough to avoid accidental encounters." "How do we prove that?" Damon asked. "Paper trail," Marcus replied, echoing Lisa's earlier words. "Every adult in America leaves digital footprints, bank transactions, employment records, utility setup, apartment leases, medical appointments. If they've been living locally, there's documentation. I just need to find it." Lisa opened a thick folder and spread papers across the conference table. "While Marcus handles the investigation, we need to protect your interests immediately. Property protection, financial account security, documentation of their current presence in your home. She handed Damon a stack of forms. Dram. These establish legal residence requirements and document the timeline of their return. If this goes to court, judges want dates, times, and witnesses. Court. The word felt heavier than Damon had expected. Fraud cases almost always end up in front of a judge, Lisa explained matter-of-factly. If Keisha's been lying about her whereabouts for legal or financial advantage, that's a serious matter. Property rights, spousal support, custody arrangements, all of these get complicated when one party has been deliberately deceptive about basic facts. Marcus was already typing on his laptop, his fingers moving with the speed of someone accessing databases that weren't available to the general public. Initial search shows utility connections, he said without looking up. Electric and gas service initiated 14 months ago at an apartment complex on Riverside Drive. Joint account under Keisha Williams and Trevor Marshall. The revelation hit like a physical blow. 14 months ago, Damon had been struggling to maintain mortgage payments alone, believing himself abandoned and potentially divorced. Meanwhile, Keisha had been establishing joint utilities with her boyfriend, 20 minutes away, living a comfortable suburban life, while he suffered through financial and emotional hell. There's more, Marcus continued, his voice clinical and professional. Employment verification from St. Mary's Medical Center that matches the hospital bracelet you found. Keisha Williams, administrative assistant, start date 16 months ago. She's been working locally this entire time. Lisa made rapid notes, organizing information into categories that would become exhibits if this proceeded to litigation. We need everything: lease agreements, bank statements, employment records, medical documentation, any evidence of their joint residence or shared financial responsibilities. What about the child? Damon asked, thinking of Zara's innocent honesty about Grammy's visits and familiar locations. Birth certificate, pediatric records, school enrollment if applicable, Marcus replied. Children create the most reliable paper trails because their care requires official documentation. If Zara's been living locally, there are medical appointments, daycare arrangements, family visits that leave traces. By the end of the meeting, Damon had signed retainer agreements and received a thick packet of instructions for documenting everything that happened in his house. Lisa emphasized the importance of maintaining detailed records, times, dates, conversations, behavior patterns that would establish the deceptive nature of Keisha's claims. Remember, Lisa said as they prepared to leave, this isn't about revenge or embarrassing anyone. This is about protecting your legal rights and establishing truthful facts. If Keisha has been deceptive about her whereabouts and intentions, the court needs to know that before making decisions about property, custody, or financial responsibilities. Driving home, Damon felt something he hadn't experienced in 3 years, the sense that he wasn't alone in this situation anymore. Professional allies were working on his behalf, building a case based on evidence rather than emotion. For the first time since Keisha's dramatic return, he felt like he might actually have some control over what happened next. But as he pulled into his driveway and saw Trevor's car parked like it belonged there, he realized the hardest part was just beginning. Now he had to live normally while gathering evidence, maintain his composure while his home was occupied by people who'd been systematically deceiving him, and document their lies without revealing his own investigation. The real performance was about to begin. The smear campaign began at breakfast on Thursday morning with surgical precision. Keisha set her coffee cup down with deliberate care and turned to face Damon with an expression of practiced concern. "I've been thinking about your behavior since we got back," she began, her voice carrying the tone of someone addressing a difficult but necessary topic. "The way you've been watching us, following our conversations, taking pictures of random things around the house. It's concerning." Trevor nodded gravely from his position at the kitchen table, where he'd established what appeared to be a permanent workspace. "Keisha mentioned you've had some struggles with control issues in the past. Maybe some anger management problems?" His question was phrased gently, but his eyes held cold calculation. "It might be worth considering professional help, especially with Zara in the house now." The accusation landed with devastating effectiveness because it contained just enough psychological manipulation to sound reasonable. Damon's documentation efforts, photographing evidence, noting inconsistencies in their stories were being reframed as obsessive surveillance. His careful observation of their behavior was being twisted into mental instability. "I'm fine," Damon said evenly, refusing to take the bait. But even his calm response could be interpreted as denial, further evidence of someone who couldn't recognize his own problems. "Of course you are," Keisha replied with the kind of gentle patronization that made his skin crawl. "But maybe we should have a professional evaluation, just to make sure everyone feels safe. Zara's been through enough instability already." Her words carried the implicit threat that his resistance would be seen as putting a child at risk. By afternoon, the narrative had spread beyond the house. Mrs. Patterson from next door stopped by with a casserole and carefully worded questions about how everyone was adjusting. Her concerned glances and gentle probing made it clear that Keisha had been sharing edited versions of their situation, painting herself as a woman trying to rebuild her family despite her ex-husband's difficulties. "Keisha mentioned you've been under a lot of stress," Mrs. Patterson said with well-meaning sympathy, "but especially when there are underlying issues to work through." Her kindness felt like salt in an open wound because Damon could see how reasonable Keisha's story must sound to outsiders. A woman returning home to find her ex-husband struggling with their reunion. Trevor escalated the psychological pressure with phone calls that Damon could hear from the next room. "Yeah, it's a difficult situation," he said, in a voice loud enough to carry. "Keisha's trying to be patient, but there are some red flags we can't ignore, especially with a child involved." The conversations were clearly performed for Damon's benefit, designed to create anxiety about social services, intervention, or professional evaluation. The most devastating blow came when Zara innocently became part of their strategy. Keisha began coaching her daughter with subtle but effective techniques, asking leading questions about feeling safe and comfortable, in ways that would sound alarming if repeated to the wrong person. "Tell Mama how you feel when people take pictures without asking," Keisha prompted gently during their afternoon snack time. "Remember what we talked about, people should ask permission before they take pictures of little girls." Zara nodded seriously, clearly wanting to please the adults around her but confused about the complexities of the situation. "Taking pictures without asking isn't nice," she repeated dutifully, though her tone suggested she didn't fully understand why this had suddenly become important. Damon felt trapped between protecting himself and protecting Zara from being used as a weapon in adult conflicts. Every interaction with the child now carried potential for misinterpretation. Every photograph or documentation effort could be twisted into evidence of inappropriate behavior. But it was Zara herself who provided the most damaging revelation, completely by accident. During dinner preparation, she pulled out a coloring book and asked Keisha for the special crayons from Dr. Sarah's office. The request seemed innocent until Keisha's face went carefully blank. "What crayons, baby?" Keisha asked with forced casualness. "The ones with the sparkles. From when we go see Dr. Sarah for my checkups, she lets me keep them." Zara's explanation was matter-of-fact, describing a routine that clearly happened regularly. "Dr. Sarah has the big fish tank with the blue fish." Trevor moved quickly to distract Zara with other activities, but not before Damon caught the exchange. A local pediatrician named Dr. Sarah, regular checkups, familiar crayons, more evidence that Zara had been receiving medical care locally, while Keisha maintained the fiction of California residence. "Zara gets confused sometimes," Trevor explained smoothly. "Kids mix up doctors' offices they've visited. All pediatric offices look the same to them. Fish tanks, coloring supplies, that kind of thing." But Damon had seen Keisha's panic in the moment before she regained control. This wasn't confusion, this was a child describing her real medical care, provided by a local doctor who would have records, appointment histories, and documentation that would prove Zara had been a patient for months, or possibly years. That evening, as Keisha put Zara to bed with what appeared to be an established routine, Damon realized how completely he'd been outmaneuvered. They weren't just living in his house, they were building a case against him while using his own home as their base of operations. Every day he allowed this to continue, gave them more opportunities to establish residency, create witnesses to his instability, and position themselves as the reasonable parties trying to make an impossible situation work. The psychological warfare was methodical and effective. By bedtime, Damon felt like a stranger in his own life, questioning his own perceptions and wondering if observers would see a man defending his rights or a troubled individual unable to accept his ex-wife's attempts at reconciliation. But he also had something Keisha didn't know about professional allies who were building their own case based on hard evidence rather than manipulated narratives. The question was whether Marcus and Lisa could work faster than Keisha and Trevor could destroy his credibility. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight brought one crucial piece of evidence. Somewhere in the city, Dr. Sarah had medical records that would prove Zara's real residence history. And medical records didn't lie the way people did. The process server arrived at 8:15 on Monday morning, dressed in a crisp suit and carrying a leather portfolio that commanded immediate attention. Damon opened the door to find Robert Chen, Lisa's brother, and a veteran of difficult service situations holding official documents that would change everything. "Good morning, sir. I have legal papers for Keisha Williams and Trevor Marshall." His voice carried professional authority that cut through morning pleasantries and announced that serious business had arrived. Keisha appeared at the top of the stairs, still in her robe, her face shifting from sleepy confusion to sharp alarm as she recognized the formal nature of the situation. "What's going on?" "Ever he's this," she called down, her voice tight with the kind of tension that came from knowing this moment would eventually arrive. "Ma'am, you've been served," Robert said, extending the papers with practiced efficiency. "These are legal documents regarding property rights, fraud investigation, and custody clarification. You have 30 days to respond through legal counsel." He handed identical packets to both Keisha and Trevor, who had emerged from the kitchen with coffee still in hand. Trevor's reaction was immediate and telling. Instead of confusion or surprise, his face showed the specific kind of panic that came from having planned for this possibility. "This is harassment," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "We just got here. We're trying to work things out as a family. The documents explain everything," Robert replied neutrally. "I recommend you both seek legal representation immediately." He handed business cards to each of them, documented the service with photographs, and left with the efficient professionalism of someone who'd delivered bad news hundreds of times before. The house fell into electric silence after the front door closed. Keisha stood at the top of the stairs clutching the legal papers like they might burst into flames, while Trevor paced the living room with the restless energy of someone whose carefully laid plans had just been disrupted. "How could you do this?" Keisha demanded, descending the stairs with righteous indignation that sounded rehearsed rather than genuine. "We're trying to rebuild our family, and you're bringing lawyers into it? What kind of message does this send to Zara?" Damon had prepared for this moment with Lisa's coaching, understanding that his response would be crucial for any future court proceedings. "These are legal questions that require legal answers," he said calmly. "Property rights, residence documentation, financial obligations. Everything needs to be clearly established for everyone's protection." Trevor stopped pacing and fixed Damon with a stare that held barely controlled hostility. "You want to know what's really going on here? You can't handle that, Keisha. Moved on, found happiness, created a real family. So you're using legal intimidation to punish her for leaving an unhealthy situation." The accusation was delivered with practiced conviction, but it revealed more than Trevor intended. He'd just admitted knowledge of Keisha's departure being voluntary, rather than the desperate escape she'd described. More importantly, he'd referenced creating a real family, as if it had taken significant time, not the recent California return they'd claimed. "How long have you two been together?" Damon asked quietly, seizing on Trevor's verbal slip. Keisha jumped in quickly, too quickly. "That's not relevant. What matters is that we're here now, trying to do what's best for Zara." But her intervention only highlighted the question she was avoiding. Trevor's phone rang, providing a momentary distraction that he grabbed desperately. But as he answered, his conversation revealed another crucial mistake. "Yeah, we got served this morning. I told you this might happen. No, we can't just leave now. That would look like we're running. The lease situation is complicated." He caught himself mid-sentence, realizing that Damon was listening, but the damage was done. He'd referenced a lease situation and implied ongoing conversations about strategy with someone who knew about their legal exposure. This wasn't a spontaneous family reunion, it was an orchestrated event with contingency plans and outside advisors. "We should probably pack," Keisha said suddenly, her voice taking on a different quality. sharper, more businesslike, less concerned with family reconciliation. If you're going to make this ugly with lawyers and investigations, maybe it's better if we find somewhere else to stay while things get sorted out. But her offer to leave revealed another strategic error. Someone genuinely interested in reconciliation would fight to stay, would demand mediation or counseling, before accepting separation. Keisha's quick pivot to departure suggested she'd gotten what she came for, and now wanted to minimize exposure to legal scrutiny. Actually, Trevor added, setting down his phone with grim determination, maybe we should accelerate our timeline. There's no point trying to work with someone who's more interested in legal warfare than family healing. Timeline. The word hung in the air like an admission of guilt. People planning spontaneous family reunions didn't have timelines. They had hopes, expectations, maybe concerns about adjustment periods. But timelines implied schedules, deadlines, and coordinated objectives that had nothing to do with emotional reconciliation. What timeline? Damon asked directly, maintaining the calm tone that Lisa had coached him to use, regardless of provocation. Keisha shot Trevor a warning look, but he was already in damage control mode. Just things we need to handle: work schedules, apartment arrangements, Zara's transition needs, normal family logistics. His explanation was smooth, but unconvincing, because it implied they'd been planning this reunion with the kind of detail that contradicted their story of emotional decision-making. By afternoon, Marcus Williams had texted with updates that transformed the morning's confrontation into devastating evidence. The lease Trevor had referenced on his phone call was real. A 14-month commitment at Riverside Gardens Apartments, jointly signed by Keisha Williams and Trevor Marshall. The employment verification from St. Mary's Medical Center showed Keisha had requested vacation time for family matters that corresponded exactly with their arrival at Damon's house. Most damning of all, pediatric records from Dr. Sarah Martinez showed Zara Williams as a patient for 18 months, with regular checkups, vaccinations, and development monitoring that proved continuous local residence. The medical records included emergency contact information listing both Keisha and Trevor at the Riverside Gardens address. The timeline was becoming unavoidable. While Damon struggled to maintain mortgage payments and wondered if his wife was alive, Keisha had been building a complete life, 20 minutes away, with employment, housing, medical care, and family routines. The 3-year abandonment was fiction. The California story was fabrication. The surprise reunion was actually the final phase of a long-term plan to claim property rights through fraudulent means. That evening, as Keisha and Trevor made phone calls behind closed doors and packed belongings with urgent efficiency, Damon realized they were no longer trying to maintain their cover story. The legal papers had forced them into retreat mode, but their hasty departure would only strengthen the fraud case Lisa was building. Tomorrow would bring court dates, documentation requirements, and formal proceedings. But tonight brought the satisfaction of watching 3 years of deception crumble under the weight of evidence they'd never expected to face. The family court hearing convened at 9 o'clock sharp on a crisp Tuesday morning, Judge Patricia Williams presiding over a courtroom that felt more like a surgical theater than a place of emotional drama. Lisa Chen had prepared Damon for the clinical nature of fraud proceedings. Evidence would be presented systematically, timelines would be established chronologically, and emotions would be secondary to documented facts. Keisha sat at the defendant's table with her hastily retained attorney, David Park, whose expression suggested he'd been handed a case with more problems than solutions. Trevor occupied the gallery, no longer the confident presence who'd claimed space in Damon's living room, but a man whose casual entitlement had evaporated under legal scrutiny. "Your Honor," Lisa began, standing at the plaintiff's table with a stack of labeled exhibits that represented weeks of investigative work. "This case involves systematic fraud designed to manipulate property rights through false claims of abandonment and reconciliation. The evidence will show that Miss Williams never left the local area, maintained continuous residence with Mr. Marshall, and orchestrated her return to claim assets she had no legal right to possess." Judge Williams nodded for Lisa to proceed, and the presentation began with devastating methodical precision. Exhibit A. Hospital bracelet dated 6 months ago, contradicting Miss Williams' claim of 3-year California residence. The plastic band was photographed from multiple angles, its timestamp and location data projected onto the courtroom screen with undeniable clarity. Exhibit B. Lease agreement for Riverside Gardens Apartments, jointly signed by Miss Williams and Mr. Marshall 14 months ago. The document filled the screen, showing signatures, addresses, and financial commitments that proved local residence during the claimed abandonment period. Monthly rent payments drawn from joint bank accounts, utility connections, and parking assignments, all documenting continuous local occupancy. David Park attempted an objection based on relevance, but Judge Williams overruled immediately. Property fraud cases required establishing intent and opportunity, which meant documenting the defendant's true circumstances during the alleged abandonment. Exhibit C. Employment verification from St. Mary's Medical Center, showing Miss Williams worked as administrative assistant for 16 months during the same period she claimed California residence. The personnel records were comprehensive: hire date, salary information, supervisor evaluations, and vacation requests that corresponded exactly with her dramatic return to Damon's house. Keisha's face remained carefully composed, but Damon could see the tension in her shoulders as each exhibit destroyed another piece of her fabricated story. Her attorney whispered urgently, probably advising her about plea possibilities and damage control strategies. Exhibit D. Banking records showing automated teller transactions at local branches throughout the alleged abandonment period. The financial trail was extensive: grocery stores, gas stations, pharmacies, all within a 20-mile radius of both the Riverside apartment and Damon's house. These transactions prove continuous local presence and contradict all claims of California residents. Exhibit E. Ring doorbell footage from Mr. Carter's residence, showing Mr. Ring doorbell footage. Marshall accessing the property with keys on multiple occasions during the supposed abandonment. The video evidence was particularly damaging because it proved premeditation. Trevor hadn't simply accompanied Keisha home, he'd been conducting surveillance, testing access, and establishing familiarity with the property layout months before their official arrival. Judge Williams leaned forward as Lisa approached the most devastating evidence. Exhibit F. Medical records from Dr. Sarah Martinez, pediatric specialist, showing 18 months of continuous care for Zara Williams. The records were comprehensive routine checkups, vaccination schedules, emergency contacts, and insurance billing that established beyond doubt that the child had been a local patient during the entire claimed California period. This is perhaps the most troubling aspect of the fraud, Lisa continued, her voice taking on the prosecutorial tone that had made her reputation. Miss Williams used her own daughter as a prop in this deception, maintaining the fiction of interstate relocation, while the child received continuous medical care locally. Keisha's composure finally cracked. "I was protecting my daughter from an unstable situation," she said, rising despite her attorney's attempts to silence her. "Everything I did was to create a safe, stable environment for Zara." "By committing fraud?" Judge Williams asked sharply. "By maintaining false residence claims while living 20 minutes away? By orchestrating false abandonment to manipulate property rights?" Exhibit G. Social services complaint records and recorded conversations planning psychological warfare against Mr. Carter. Lisa's voice remained clinical as she presented evidence of the smear campaign. These recordings demonstrate intent to manipulate custody through false allegations of mental instability. The audio evidence was devastating. Trevor's voice, clear and calculated, discussing strategies for making Damon appear unstable. "If we can get him to overreact, document some angry outbursts, maybe get neighbors to witness erratic behavior." The conspiracy was laid bare in their own words. Exhibit H. Brandon Mitchell connection and documented staged abandonment conspiracy. The final exhibit tied together loose threads that had seemed unrelated. Phone records, financial transfers, and witness statements proved that Keisha's departure 3 years ago had been coordinated with extended family members to establish false abandonment claims. Judge Williams called for a 30-minute recess, during which David Park engaged in urgent negotiations with Lisa about settlement possibilities. But the evidence was too comprehensive, the fraud too systematic, for plea bargaining to resolve the legal consequences. When court reconvened, Judge Williams delivered her ruling with surgical precision. Property rights restored to Mr. Carter, with full legal title. Miss Williams forfeits all claims to marital assets based on fraudulent abandonment. Mr. Marshall permanently banned from the property. Referral to District Attorney for criminal fraud investigation. I modify. The gavel fell with finality that echoed through the courtroom. 3 years of deception had been dismantled in 2 hours of evidence presentation. Outside the courthouse, Damon felt something he hadn't experienced since the day Keisha first disappeared: complete ownership of his own life. The house was his. The mortgage was his responsibility. But so was the equity. The future was uncertain, but it was honestly uncertain rather than built on lies. Lisa handed him the court order with professional satisfaction. This should prevent any future attempts to claim property or custody rights. The criminal referral means they'll face additional consequences for the fraud conspiracy. As Damon drove home to a house that was finally, legally, unquestionably his own, he thought about the lesson 3 years of enforced independence had taught him. Sometimes the most powerful response to betrayal wasn't anger or revenge, but patience and evidence. Justice, when it finally arrived, was surgical in its precision and complete in its restoration of dignity.